Yeah, guess I did keep y'all waiting, huh? Well, here we are, Resident Evil 5 through 8 reviews. Where did we last leave off? Oh, yeah, best game of all time, one of my favorites of all time. Definitely the best Resident Evil game by far, Resident Evil 4. Where are we headed?
Resident Evil 5.
Oh. Oh, God. Okay, I suppose I should fill you guys in on Resident Evil 5, even though everyone knows the story. Capcom saw the success of Resident Evil 4 and wanted to expand on the action genre and gameplay in their next best-selling game right behind Monster Hunter, Resident Evil 5. People bought this game after the success of Resident Evil 4, expecting it to be good. Clearly, their expectations were let down. So here's the rundown. You play as Chris Redfield. He has arms thick enough to be registered as legal weapons. Him and his buddy, Sheva, have been sent to Africa to investigate a new outbreak of basically the exact same virus we've been dealing with since Raccoon City blew up. Only this time it's named in the Martin Luther King language. Co-op is the big new feature here. You can play online with a buddy, which, as you can see from my gameplay on screen, was what I did. Or offline with AI Sheva, which, although I didn't experience, I imagine is as horrendous as it sounds. Now, you might be thinking, holy shit, your gameplay in the background runs terribly. What shitty free recording software did you use? But, that's not the recording software. That, my friend, is how RE5 runs on my brand new PC with a pretty decent graphics cards, mind you. I mean, I have a pretty shitty monitor, but I don't think that has anything to do with how the game runs other than display. So yeah, that's another thing to add to the long list of reasons to not play Resident Evil 5. Because the 16-year-old game can't run properly on modern devices. Now, Resident Evil 5, in terms of gameplay, isn't necessarily bad. There's a great cast of characters, each with unique movesets. The melee combat in this game is actually one of the few good things about it. The gunplay itself isn't even that bad. In fact, it plays fairly similar to the original Resident Evil 4. And during cutscenes, there are some really cool QuickTime events that add to gameplay experience. The inventory management is still practically just playing Tetris, and when playing multiplayer, you can give your items to your co-op partner. One of you needs healed up, go ahead and swallow some herbs. Granted, I'm not sure how swallowing leaves heals gunshot wounds, but also, this is Chris Redfield, so I'm not going to question any of it. Actually, you know what? That explains it. Alright, so if Resident Evil 5's gameplay is so great, even on par or better than Resident Evil 4's, then what makes it a bad game in comparison to the beloved Resident Evil 4? I mean, Chris is just as well written of a character as Leon, so that can't possibly be it. Well, let's go over it actually. I've already mentioned how the game runs on PC, which was partially a Wi-Fi issue for me, jokes aside, but in the Mercenaries mode it ran just fine. What I haven't mentioned is the visuals. I've also mentioned that I don't have the best monitor, but that doesn't make the game's visuals any better or worse in this given situation. Whether on PC or console, the game has some disgusting diarrhea-colored filter over it that makes every character model, every menu screen, every backdrop, etc. all look badly designed. And I won't even go as far as to say that they are badly designed, because truth is, they're not. In fact, a lot of the assets in this game are reused for RE6, which, in my opinion, has amazing visuals. But the lack of color scheme due to that disgusting looking filter over your gameplay experience just ruins everything visually. In Resident Evil 4, the game uses color schemes in a clever way, giving each section of the game a unique atmosphere to it. In Resident Evil 5, there are no memorable sections other than the ones where the game wraps up, and those are mostly for story reasons. Now let's go back to the item management for a second. As we all know, the item management is a major part about just about every Resident Evil to date, but 5 and 6 change that for the worse. There's never a point in either of the two games that you'll have to worry about running out of ammo. RE4 does a really clever thing with items where the items will spawn based on what you need in your inventory. If you're low on handgun ammo, kill the nearest enemy and the chances of handgun ammo spawning become a lot higher. In Resident Evil 5, you're bombarded with ammo and healing items everywhere you go in the game. You can even buy them with skill points after you're done with a chapter. It plays more like a third-person shooter than a Resident Evil game. Even on higher difficulties, the item management is the least of your concerns. They practically just up the durability of enemies and call it a day. Speaking of the enemies, they're fucking brain dead in this game, and that's not a zombie pun. I mean, the enemies, who are zombies, mind you, have guns. Why? Who made this decision? Since when are zombies intelligent enough to carry rocket launchers? And that, my friends, is where the main issue with RE5 lies. The action. Resident Evil 5 is an action game in a franchise that is not an action franchise. Yes, Leon Kennedy has a badass, unnecessary backflip. Yes, the plot lines are filled with betrayal. Yes, the gunplay is a major factor in each game. But Resident Evil's identity as a horror franchise was established from day one. With Resident Evil 5 and 6, they throw that out the window. The only threat that the enemies pose is the fact that they're big monsters, and forgettable ones at that. The only boss fight I remember from Resident Evil 5 is Wesker's, and that's only because of how much my friend and I were laughing our asses off at his shitty dialogue.
There's no point in hiding.
Capcom saw the success of Resident Evil 4 and pushed further into the action, but mid-game you stop and realize you're practically just playing Call of Duty Watermelon Warriors with all the fucking racism in this game. And don't even get me started on this game's story. It's easily the worst written story out of any Resident Evil game out there. Basically, Jill is presumed dead and Chris has to get along with his new partner, Sheva. But Sheva as a character is really forgettable. She hasn't even been in any other Resident Evil games since this one. You as the player are supposed to feel connected or whatever to Sheva, but you never get to because Chris's bond with Jill is never covered in this game. The only time we see Chris and Jill together are in a DLC campaign that's maybe 45 minutes long and is mostly a rehash of the cutscenes we already saw later in the main game's campaign. I wanted this campaign to make sense so badly, but the truth is it doesn't. The one redeeming factor about this is the combat in this game. Holdout sections and boss fights are undoubtedly the most fun I had out of this experience, but even so, it wasn't enough to make Resident Evil 5 a good game. This isn't even the type of game I would classify as so bad it's good or whatever. It's just boring and bad. Every section is repetitive. Surely the series couldn't get worse than this, right?
Resident Evil 6.
I beg to differ. Well, partially. Truth is, I enjoy RE6 a lot more than RE5, but that is not because the game's good. That's only due to the fact that this is what you can classify as a game so bad it's good. I don't want to spend too much time talking about this game because I'd kind of just be repeating what I said about Resident Evil 5. Great combat, but at the cost of every other gameplay aspect sucking. The item spawns in this game are terrible. Sure, you'll never run out of ammo, but healing items are practically impossible to find in this game. If the last one was Call of Duty Watermelon Warriors, that makes RE6 fucking Call of Duty. I don't know. Why? Because this game takes place in the old USA, and Leon is best friends with another president. Seriously, how does Leon know like 4 different presidents? Anyways, multiplayer is a feature of this game again, and I'll touch on the good and bad of that in a moment here. Another new feature of this game is that it has multiple campaigns. Each campaign follows a different character throughout the game's story. However, the campaigns also overlap with one another. So although each campaign is its own unique story with unique characters and gameplay sections, there's also a lot of reused gameplay sections. For example, you'll play a section in Chris's campaign just to be forced to replay it in Jake's campaign. Who's Jake, you might be asking?
You lost me.
Albert Wesker was a colossal imbecile. A fool who tried to destroy the world. He was also your father.
Yeah, it turns out the guy we pushed into a volcano in the last game has a whole family tree. Anyways, the 4 campaigns you'll play in Resident Evil 6 are Leon's campaign, where you'll have the most fun out of any of them, Chris's campaign, Jake's campaign, and Ada Wong's campaign. Leon's is the best by far because it has some minor horror elements to it, and I give Ada a runner-up because there are some really cool puzzles. But that's about the only good thing I can name in terms of gameplay throughout any of the 4 campaigns. Now back to the multiplayer thing for a second. The game is clearly designed around multiplayer to the point where the first 3 campaigns of the game are unplayable without it. But when you get around the Ada's campaign, it is clearly meant to be a single-player experience. There is, however, a multiplayer mode just like every other campaign. But the second player cannot do anything other than combat. You lose the ability to open fucking doors, for goodness sake. The character player 2 is playing as in Ada's campaign is just named Agent. Agent. Yeah, as I'm sure you could tell, he is a non-canon character who doesn't appear in any cutscenes. And Ada has this cool feature with a grapple that she can use to get around the map. But Agent doesn't have access to it. So if you're player number 2 and you decide to go ahead of player number 1, then you're at a dead end in terms of progress. You have to wait for Ada to get there with her grapple. And you don't even climb on top of her whenever she grapples up. I mean, isn't that the whole reason any of us played this campaign? No, instead of getting a very suggestive pose, Ada uses the grapple and transitions to the next section. And Agent fucking teleports! You sure he's not Albert Wesker's son? As much as I'd like to go over the story bits of every campaign, I am trying to keep this video under 30 minutes, and we've still got 2 games to go after this. So let's move on to Leon's campaign. Leon and Chris are undoubtedly the most enjoyable campaigns in the game. They're filled with action, and I'd argue even have some decent writing in terms of story. There's also a lot of value in seeing characters like Leon and Chris finally meet in the games. I mean, the whole thing feels like the Avengers Endgame of the Resident Evil universe. There's even a line Ada drops at some point where right after meeting Leon again, she sees Chris chasing after a clone of her. Yeah, that's a thing in this for some reason. And she says something about a Raccoon City reunion. It's a great testament to how each of the characters up until now had been going through their own personal character arcs, and it took 6 entries to the franchise to have them finally interact with one another, despite the fact that we as fans knew all along that they already had established relationships. There are some new characters here as well, most notably Helena, your co-op partner in Leon's campaign, Piers, your co-op partner in Chris's campaign, and Jake, who player 1 plays as with Sherry, a name you'll recognize from Resident Evil 2 as the little girl that Leon and Claire saved from Raccoon City back in the day. Even the new characters have greatly established character interactions and development. I'd go as far as to say Chris and Piers' relationship throughout the Chris campaign is a good dynamic. Same for just about every other character dynamic other than Ada and Agent for obvious reasons. I mean, hey, there's even a scene in Jake's campaign where we get to watch Sherry change. She is of age now, mind you, just to clarify. Let's just say she got some great personality going for her. Anyways, like I said, I don't want to spend too much time talking about RE6, but I can't say that I fully hate this game. Whereas RE5 is just bland and boring, RE6 suffers from the same gameplay issues, but at least gives us an interesting story and a fun co-op experience. I can't pretend like I hate this game, but I also can't pretend like it's good. It's filled with great characters, an overly dramatic finale type of story, and a setup for something to do with Ada Wong that Capcom clearly dropped because this game was ass.
Good job, huh? Sure. My schedule just cleared.
Alright, so if Resident Evil 6 was so ass to the point where they didn't even follow up on that ending cutscene with Ada, then why exactly is Resident Evil so popular to this day? Well, that, my friends, is because Capcom did what no gaming company has ever done before. They learned their fucking lesson. Now let me clarify. There is a narrator introduction to the Resident Evil 7, you know, the classic Resident Evil. But that version of the intro is just so iconic, I had to use it in this video. The song is so iconic because it sets up the game for psychological dread and isolation. The scenes of the Baker family, even though they're brief in that intro, perfectly capture what horror is about. Suspense. This way, right from the moment you start the game up, before you even touch your controller, you know you're in for something special. It leaves you wondering small things like who that woman in the wheelchair could be. Who is that up there in the house? Are we the ones using that axe? Or is it symbolic for someone or something else? All I can say is Nintendo, Rockstar, and Ubisoft all need to take notes off of Capcom. Capcom released Resident Evil 7, better known as Biohazard, in 2017, and they made Resident Evil scary again. Not just scary, horrifying. It's rated on multiple sites as one of the scariest games of all time. Plus, they released the Resident Evil Remake trilogy after the release of RE6. But I've talked about those already in my other Resident Evil franchise video, so definitely check that one out. Anyways, the thing that makes RE7 scary is a return to form. They rebooted the franchise and all, but just because there's a new cast of characters, that doesn't mean the gameplay is any worse than it was in the first 4 games of the series. In fact, the gameplay is good again. I know, right? I figured after the mess that was Resident Evil 6, we could only go more downhill. But in Resident Evil 7, they throw you back into the survival horror gameplay that made the first 4 so fun. It's even in first person now to increase immersion. I'll start off with the opening sections of the game because those are undoubtedly my favorite sections. Basically, Ethan Winters is the protagonist, and he's going to look for his wife in a house that looks like every other horror movie house. It's in the middle of the woods too, so I definitely would not trust this place. If I was Ethan, I would have run back to my ex real fucking quick. But Ethan is clearly a lot more motivated than that. Because he pulls up to this place, no weapons, no items, nothing, and starts exploring. The gate to the big creepy house is locked, so there's no way inside. You would think by this point Ethan just turns around, calls the police, something like that. But no, he goes back to another creepy old house and looks for shit. Well, let's just say he finds some shit.
Welcome to the family, son.
Now, I know this cutscene is heavily memeified and whatnot, but in truth, it's a testament to how scary this game is. This cutscene comes out of nowhere and jump scares you when you least expect it. Every other jump scare in the game does the exact same thing. Usually when there's a jump scare in a horror game, they intensify the music, or it's some cutscene of sorts, but every jump scare in Resident Evil 7 happens when you least expect it. It's only after you get kidnapped by the infamous Jack Baker that you get to wield a gun for the first time after a cop kindly offers it to you.
Hey, put that door back! Put that door back up! Wait!
When you get that first gun, you quickly realize that unlike 5 and 6, Resident Evil 7 is not a shooter. Ammo and resources are back to being used for survival and not destruction. If you run out of ammo, you're fucked inside and out and in just about every position possible. What I will say is that I don't like the way this game handles boss fights. They practically load you up on supplies right before entering a boss fight, but the boss fights are at least memorable and creative in comparison to just shooting your heart out in Resident Evil 5 and 6. Let's also mention that this game came out in 2017 and the graphics still hold up to the likes of the Resident Evil 4 remake that released in 2024. And the horror elements are something I could rant about for hours. Outside of the occasional jump scare, there are plenty of moments where this game just scares the fucking shit out of you. Whether it be turning around and seeing an absolute little girl running off, hearing your wife whisper your name in the complete dark randomly, being itchy in your sleep because Big Mama has fucking roaches crawling out of her vagina, you name it. Resident Evil 7 deserves the title of horror genre better than any other Resident Evil game by far. This is the type of game that makes you turn the fucking light on while you play it. This is the type of game that makes you sure to shut your closet door at night. This is the type of game that has you shift your position in bed to make sure your back is facing the fucking wall. There's never a moment in this game where you're not vulnerable to something creeping around the corner, like Jack Baker, for instance. And although it's a reboot, there's still plenty of connections to the original games that makes this game feel like a love letter to Resident Evil. Chris even has his own DLC, and there are plenty of amazing references to the original games, like having to replace the shotgun with the broken shotgun, a puzzle that we see all the way back in the original Resident Evil. I'll even mention the fact that there are body parts just about everywhere you go in the Baker's property, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. It yet again sets that mood that you're just one of the lucky ones so far, unless you look at the plot twist in Resident Evil Village. But anyways, you are surviving against the Bakers, not fighting against them. Plus, it's generally just disgusting seeing a human head in the fridge when you open it up, which is exactly the kind of thing you want to say about a horror game. Now, RE7 does have some flaws. All the good things I've listed about it apply to about the first half of the game, but after the first half of dealing with Mommy and Daddy Baker, and I'll give Lucas some credit too because he's a fucking Saw reject, but you still have about 3 hours of gameplay left after those sections that consist of very easy and repetitive puzzles. It's not even just this game, it tends to be a trope you see in every Resident Evil out there. Outstanding first half because it's focused on the unknown around you, but when you start digging into what's really going on behind the scenes and finding out the lore reasons for all the terrifying monsters chasing you, it just becomes very slow-paced. I wouldn't go as far as to say boring, but let me use the salt mine section of the game as an example. Most of the puzzles here are extremely linear. It's point A to point B 90% of the time, and enemy encounters can very easily be avoided by simply running past them and getting to your next save room. I had a point during the salt mine section where my game crashed because my power went out and I didn't really feel the urge to immediately hop back in the game and make more progress until a couple hours later, despite being in the home stretch of finishing things up with Ethan's story. The story explanations for the Bakers being possessed by Evelyn are pretty interesting, at least. I love the idea that the Bakers were once just a normal family that fell victim to experiments conducted by a branch of Umbrella. Yeah, you remember those guys from the last 6 games. All seriousness, it goes back to the themes of greed that the original trilogy of games covered. There's one cutscene in the game where you have a genuine face-to-face conversation with Jack Baker, seemingly some sort of telepathic thing. And during this cutscene, he conveys his humanity to Ethan, even asking Ethan to save his family from these experiments. It almost makes you forgive him for climbing on top of that car and trying to murder you with a chainsaw earlier on. But my favorite thing about this cutscene with Jack is that in seeing his humanity, you see the cruelty of not him and his family, but the organization that caused it all. It's like the message of Resident Evil 3, but done right. But even with that symbolism and morality questioning and whatnot, Capcom no doubt gave a great game with a bad ending. That's the only way I can really put it. I mean, the final boss fight is a scripted event, with the only possible outcome of you dying being not dealing any damage to Evelyn. It's an extremely underwhelming ending half compared to the amazingly set up first half. Now yeah, the final sections of the game aren't as strong as the first ones, but nonetheless, this game is the definitive Resident Evil experience, outside of maybe Resident Evil 4 and its remake. It's undoubtedly in my top 3, and while not as good as Resident Evil 4 Remake, I find it hard to choose between this and Resident Evil 2 Remake. But that's enough Resident Evil 7 ranting. Time to actually play Resident Evil Village and finish editing this video when I beat the game in a couple months from now.
Starting to go a little stale.
Okay, that was something, alright. Now let me clarify, I had fun with this game. Its gameplay is exactly what Resident Evil should be, but the story of this game is so overdramatic. I mean, Ethan risks his life for people he just met within the first hour of the game, only to then be kidnapped by a witch and chased by werewolves. The whole time I was playing this, I could sense some obvious Devil May Cry inspiration with all the over-the-top action, story moments, and voice acting. And although the item management is fun and replicates exactly what you would want out of a Resident Evil game, it also brings back that whole idea of guns being used for destruction rather than survival. The game no doubt starts out great, with Chris Redfield fucking murdering your wife and leaving you for dead in a random village with a bunch of infected werewolf people. And although I enjoyed the story even after that, I can admit that even for Resident Evil, it's very over the top. Movement is also a lot more fluid in this entry than in Resident Evil 7. The gunplay is better designed, the knife feels more badass, and just walking around feels a lot more smooth than Resident Evil 7. But it comes at the cost of no longer displaying that vulnerability that Resident Evil 7 did when you were being chased by the Baker. Another thing I'll throw out there is that the whole plot twist with Jack Baker made absolutely no sense. Yeah, it explains Ethan's hand in RE7 and his heart getting ripped out in this game, but outside of that, it feels like a lazy excuse to wrap up Ethan's story. I mean, you'd think after the events of Resident Evil 7, Chris and his team would run tests on Ethan and Mia to see if they were infected. And don't quote me on this, but I believe that's even heavily implied in Chris's DLC campaign in RE7, but nonetheless, it was a cool plot twist that added some more overly dramatic elements to the story. I'll say it now, I have no issue with overly dramatic stories. I mean, I'm a Devil May Cry fan, for goodness sake, but the way they do it here makes this feel more like an action game again, as opposed to the horrifying experience that was Resident Evil 7. I do like the gun variety in this game, as well as the gunplay, as mentioned earlier, but again, none of the enemies ever really come across as a threat to begin with, making the gunplay not all that meaningful. One thing I'll give this game over RE7 is consistency. Granted, it definitely is based around personal preference, whether you're more into realism or if you're into dramatic action stories, what have you. But Resident Evil 8 is maybe the only Resident Evil game, apart from the RE4 remake, where by the end I wasn't interested in the story anymore. This game remains consistent with its gameplay, story, and unlike other Resident Evil titles, it never really has a difficulty spike. Instead, it stays balanced for the player based on the gameplay experience you've had thus far. I guess my overall thoughts on this game is that classic argument that it's a good game, it just doesn't belong in the Resident Evil franchise. Some people will make that same argument for Resident Evil 7, which I heavily disagree with, but with Resident Evil 8, the game is much more combat-based, and most of the time you're following a fairly linear path. You do have to backtrack to the village every now and then, but it's never not obvious to the player where you're going. The point I'm trying to get across here is that this game provides you with a great gameplay experience, but not a good Resident Evil experience. Overall, I enjoyed Resident Evil 8 just as much, if not more, than some of the rest of the games in the franchise. Just, not Resident Evil 5, because that game is shit. But all seriousness, Resident Evil 8 deserves as much love and attention as the rest of the games in this series. I think that about wraps up my thoughts on Resident Evil 5 through 8, so do me a favor by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Maybe even leave a comment letting me know what review videos you'd like to see next, and what I can do to improve them. Also, if you haven't already, give some of these games a try. Just not Resident Evil 5, because, it's shit. I hate that game with everything in me. If you have already played these, then I hope you're as excited as I am for Resident Evil Requiem. As of the time I'm recording this, the game comes out in about 7 months, and I, for one, could not be more excited. It's crazy how Resident Evil went from being a franchise I was never really interested in because of the puzzles and non-linear aspects to it, to now being my favorite gaming franchise of all time. If there are any other Resident Evil games I should play, like Revelations or Zero, let me know if you guys would like to see a video review on those as well. Until then, this is Gamer World Master, signing out.